Hi, how's everybody doing today? So my name is Dr. Compton, and I'm here to talk to you about myopia management. But we're going to do it from a different perspective. We're going to talk about ways that we can set goals, but achievable goals and expectations throughout that myopia management process. So just going to give you a little background about myself. I practice here in New York, and I have 3 locations: 2 in Manhattan and 1 in the, 2 in the Bronx and 1 in Manhattan. I've been a private practice owner for about 8 years now. Super excited about what we're doing here in the city. I am adjunct faculty with the SUNY State College of Optometry, which means that I work hand in hand with a lot of the externs that rotate through the clinics. And I'm really proud of the work that we're doing right now within the American Optometric Association, my role there. A lot of different roles, especially within the contact lens and cornea section, but also within the NYSOA. A lot of stuff going on there with our state, getting things passed, and just really excited about what's happening with organized optometry. Now, when I talk about my practice, there's a lot of different aspects of different things we offer our patients, but a very big part of what we do is myopia management. And what I'm hoping to do with this lecture is show you some of the things that we've learned over the years and possibly things that you can help with your practices in implementing different strategies. When we talk about financial disclosures, I do have an advisory role with Johnson & Johnson, but aside from that, I have nothing else to disclose. So, to set a background, we talk about myopia. Now, myopia for years has been really just considered nothing more than just like a refractive error. But when we think about it today, science has really gotten us to a point where we're looking at it much differently now, more of a disease, or at the very least, a risk factor for disease. And when we talk about defining myopia, we're really talking about that mismatch between your axial length and refractive error. When we're talking about a specific number, it's really that spherical equivalent of about a half a diopter of myopia. And high myopia is really defined when we're talking about -6. Now, as we think about that definition, we have to kind of acknowledge that our understanding has changed quite a bit over the years. Typically before, we were thinking about myopia really around the ages of 6 and 12, but we've known that the onset of myopia is happening much earlier than what we've originally thought. And not only is the onset happening sooner, it's happening a lot more aggressively. There's much more an increase in the magnitude of refractive errors that we're finding. And because of that, we're finding ourselves in a situation where we have a lot of risk factors that are potentially there if we're not doing anything about it. This is a table that I use quite often in our practice, which really helps me educate my patients and especially parents on what is the risk and how managing that risk is so important, where as a -2 is so much different than a -8 when we're talking about risk factors for things like cataracts, retinal detachments, macular degeneration. You can see myopic macular degeneration, a -2 patient's 2.2 times risk, where at a -8, we're talking about 128 times risk. So understanding these risk factors has really changed how we as a profession, is how we are not only educating our patients, but how we're treating it. And fortunately, we have a lot of options to treat myopia. We talk about things like orthokeratology, soft lenses, atropine, spectacles, environment. Once we get to the point where we're defining it, and we're defining the fact that these issues, or myopia specifically, needs to be addressed, it's great to have things in our toolbox in order to offer patients to kind of do something about it. We talk about orthokeratology. It's been around for a very long time, and recent evidence shows that there is a very specific connection to treating patients with ortho-K and the ability to slow down the progression of myopia. Why? Because of our understanding of myopic defocus. Using that reverse curve allows us to kind of trick the eye in reducing that axial length progression. That same principle is found with soft lenses. When we talk about that defocus and being able to give that central retina, that clear distance target, and that peripheral retina, whether we're using center distance multifocal lenses or even newer lenses that are specifically designed for myopia management, it allows us to address that axial length that we know is at the root cause of these children develop this axial length elongation and myopia progression. I like this profile map here that really kind of speaks to some of the designs that are available. But again, that center focus and dealing with that peripheral defocus or simultaneous defocus really allows us to offer something to our patients with regards to controlling myopia. Low dose atropine is great. We talk about globally, that's the largest pharmaceutical agent that's used. And our understanding with atropine has definitely changed over the years. When it first started, we were under the impression that it was accommodative process, but we know now that that's not really the case. There are some theories that are out there, whether it's a retinal theory, scleral theory, there's choroidal theories out there, but theories that speak to inhibiting that growth, that axial length growth that's contributing to our ability to control myopia. Spectacles is another area where our understanding has changed, and it's probably the easiest method of all the methods, because we're it's a lot easier, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, to prescribe glasses. But like I said, our understanding has changed quite a bit. Previously, when we thought there were accommodative issues contributing to it, bifocals or reading glasses were prescribed. Now, studies show that they have varying results. Yes, they're still effective when patients are very specific and they have accommodative issues, but technology has gotten us to the point where there are new generation spectacles that are available. If you're practicing in the States, we really don't have any options at the time of this recording that are FDA approved, but our neighbors in Canada have a couple of these options available. We talk about the DIMS, the HALT, and the DOT. These are options where we can offer truly myopia management correction in a spectacle lens. The DIMS technology, they have that central zone that allows us to correct that central retina, and they use these little lenses where you can see they have these little segments that are around that central area that allow, again, that peripheral defocus that we spoke about with the contact lenses, that allows us to correct that central retina with the distance target, but give something different to that peripheral retina. Same idea with the HALT technology, where they use these aspheric lenslets on the side that achieves the same goal. There's the diffusion optics technology. That's the one that's depicted here. That one works a little bit differently, and it speaks to contrast detection. But again, what we're trying to do is we're preventing that axial elongation. And the final treatment we have is probably the easiest one. That's the environment and lifestyle education. There's so many studies that are out right now that really speak to that time that a patient is spent outdoor. There's a huge correlation with the advancement or progression of myopia. When we talk about high levels of near work, getting that kid outside, engaging in sports activities, having that sun interaction, those are a treatment option in and of itself that's a lot easier for a parent, or at times, and we'll talk about that, easy for a parent to implement. But when we talk about these options, you know, as we become more experienced and comfortable with these options, we really bring ourselves to a point where we have to start making decisions as to, you know, when do I offer this option to a patient? When do I offer that option to a patient? And that's really where I started when I started creating this lecture. And I wanted to figure out ways that we can kind of set personal expectations as we're starting to figure out how we're offering these to different patients and parents. But in creating the lecture, I thought, you know, our expectations are one, but there are other people that are involved in this process. You know, your parents that you're talking to, they have certain expectations about the process. The staff that you are working with, they have expectations about myopia management. Even the kid, the patient themselves, they have expectations. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of look at each individual participant in this whole process, look at the expectations that they may have, or that we can help them achieve throughout the process so that it can become much more efficient on every level of myopia management. So let's start with the practitioner. What are the expectations that you have as a practitioner? The potential patients, like who are my patients that I'm offering this to? A myopia progressor, who's progressing? How do I know when I'm getting enough reduction? What are the difference in patients? The conversations that I'm having with parents, your level of expertise, all these things go into our expectations. So we're going to dive into that now, talking about potential patients. So who are you offering myopia management to? You know, entropitzation and metropitzation is a very good way to start and understanding what no refractive error really means. Now, thankfully, there are a lot of studies out there that help us come to a better understanding of where kids should be along that spectrum. We know at birth, we're looking for a little bit of hyperopia extending into their early ages. You know, emmetropitzation really is going to start happening not that early. We're looking in the early teens. And again, when we're talking about myopia, it's as low as 0.5 and high myopia as high as 0.6. And then you can look at it from a refractive area component, but you can also, if you're measuring axial length, look at what those normative values are. And once you start seeing who falls outside of that normative data, that's when you can start thinking, well, who are my potential patients I should be offering this to? You know, so where should your expectations be? We looked at the normative data, but you can think about family history. We know very clearly that one myopic parent increases the risk by threefold. 2 myopia parents doubles that risk. You talk about the visual environment. If we know a kid is spending very few hours outside, we know we can have the expectation that they're going to be at a higher risk. We talk about kids with binocular issues, you know, those higher accommodative conversions, ACA ratios, typically seen with esophoria, these people have higher risk. And we talk about that refraction. Again, looking at the normative data tells us if that kid has 0.5 or less of hyperopia at 6 to 7, that family risk and visual environment, all these components put that kid at a higher risk. You know, this is a conversation I have a lot of times with my externs. You know, you think about risk factors, and a lot of times they're just really focused on those myopes, but you really need to be following your hyperopes. I love this chart because you can see very clearly, you know, a 9-year-old with a plus 50, that's a risk for myopia. You know, you may not thinking about it right off the bat, but again, the data that's available to us, making those evidence-based decisions, we know that certain hyperopes are at a risk for developing myopia. And we should really have that information with us when we're setting expectations on who our potential patients should be. So, all right, so we know who our potential patients should be. How aggressive can we, should we be thinking about these patients progressing? You know, a lot of it has to do with the same patients that are identified as having risk factors. Those are the same risk factors for defining whether or not a patient is going to progress much more aggressively. For example, the age. The younger child becomes myopic, we really understand that the faster that they're going to progress. Again, the family history. We know that children with 2 myopic parents have a tendency to progress much more rapidly. Again, the visual environment. We know that if a child is spending an excessive amount of time indoors, not spending enough time outdoors, studies show that these children will progress more aggressively. Ethnicity is something that we can't deny either. The studies show Asian ethnicity has been linked to much faster progression. And then there's the binocular components that we discussed previously. I love this, this infographic. This is something that was developed by the Brian Holden Institute. They have a lot of great infographics, but it speaks to the 2 things that we just spoke, that we've just addressed. When we talk about increased risk of onset and increased risk of progression, you really need to have a very good foundation of expectations on who's at risk for onset and who's at risk to progress faster. And you can see a lot of it's the same. Those 2 myopic parents, the Asian ethnicity, excessive near work, decreased near time. decreased outdoor time. So having that understanding is really helpful in managing our own personal expectations on who should be getting this treatment and who is going to progress faster. So once we have that understanding and we know that this patient is at risk and this patient is at risk to progress rapidly, we need to start making our decision-making process around the evidence that's available or the processes that are available to offer these patients. We talk about orthokeratology. It's been around long enough now that we have so much data. I mean, this particular study took 10 years of retrospective data. And it really spoke to the fact that it clearly defines that there is a long-term efficacy with orthokeratology. Another study here, 12 years. And it was pretty much stated that overnight orthokeratology is extremely effective in slowing myopia progression over a 12-year period. So again, we have that data over such a long period of time. We talk about multifocal soft lenses. You know, one of the lens brands that just received FDA approval fairly recently. So there's a lot of studies. This particular one showed the effectiveness in 59% progression when you compared the test group to the control group. And that was not only in refractive error, but axial length. That's what these studies are showing. You know, this particular study showed that 70% of the children in the study, myopia progression was reduced by 30% or more. So there are expectations that we can have based on the data that's available with studies that that show that there's clear evidence of reduction with these therapy options. You know, we talk about atropine. There are plenty of studies that, number one, speak to the safety and the efficiency of it from 0.01 to 1%. I should say 0.01. But right now, I should say as of late, we've really been trying to better understand how effective the different percentages are with progression. You know, most studies speak to 0.05% as being the most effective or the most optimal concentration for treatment. One of the studies that was very helpful in showing that was the LAMP study. You can see that the progression was lower in that 0.05 percentage. And phase 3 of that study just came out not that long ago, where we were looking at the rebound effect. This is pretty interesting in our industry because we're trying to figure out, you know, how do we interpret this data? While we do understand that 0.05 was great, it did have the largest rebound effect. So that's something that practitioners are looking at and seeing how that's going to modify their treatment. But the evidence is there that we know that it works. Spectacles, I know I addressed earlier in the US, we don't really have access to it, but the studies that exist in other parts of the world is extremely promising. And some studies showing it is equally as effective as our contact lens options that we're offering patients. So when we're setting our expectations, you know, again, we're going to talk about, well, who are the potential patients? You know, how aggressive will they progress? What evidence-based approaches do I have to offer these patients? But then it comes down to making a decision, you know, like I know I have all these options to offer patients, like who do I offer what to? And in our practice, I think that one thing that we stress a lot is really understanding patient differences and not using a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to myopia management. Patients have different functional and anatomical differences in their eyes, but there are other things that we look at when we're determining whether or not a patient is a good candidate, and that would be lifestyle and motivation. You know, I have here listed that all the different types of differences that patients have that will help you take an evidence-based approach on which particular myopia management option you will be offering. So for instance, how about pupil size? What are your expectations around pupil size? So a patient with small pupil size may be actual bad candidates for soft multifocal lenses. Why? Because these lenses are most effective when the add power is in the center of the pupil. So a patient has small pupils, they may not get that full treatment, okay? Large pupils, we look at it from another perspective. Now, these large pupil patients may be bad candidates for ortho-K. So, and the reason being is because large pupils have a difficult time dealing with that central treatment zone, which is generally around 5 to 6 millimeters. So they're going to experience glare with this treatment option. But you see how just looking at pupil size can help you determine whether your expectations on success for one design over another. Let's look at something else. How about a patient that presents with a low initial prescription, but you think that they're at a higher risk for myopia progression? So these patients, based on the studies, might be good candidates for atropine. There were studies to show that children who had 1 to 3 diopters of myopia, they exhibited a very good effect as opposed to patients with higher levels of myopia. How about active lifestyles? How can that help your expectations? Well, children who are athletes, especially swimmers, are good candidates for ortho-K, and we understand why, because they remove the lenses in the morning and they don't have to worry about any type of additional correction throughout the day. Amazing for athletes. How about social concerns? Children with social issues may be good candidates for soft lenses or orthokeratology. You know, there's so many studies that are out there, and they've been out for quite some time, that really are able to link a child's increased self-confidence and participation in things in school when they're able to remove their glasses. So if you're making a determination on what treatment option to go on a patient, a background or understanding of how that patient deals with social issues may be a factor. Or how about compliance concerns? You know, if we are doing soft lenses, if we are doing ortho-K, you know, we know those soft contact lenses need to be worn at 5 to 8 hours a day. We know the ortho-K lenses have to be worn a minimum, we want, of 8 hours at night. If we're in a situation where we think compliance is an issue, you really need to think about another treatment option, and that's how you can help set correct expectations. We talked about age concerns. Older children may be a great candidate for no treatment. Studies show that once at higher levels, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, there starts to be a stabilization of the myopia, mid-teens and early 20s. So you may not even have to do anything at all, depending on the age that you're meeting this patient. And age is also a factor on the other spectrum. You know, we talked about how younger kids, especially because of other factors in the with family history and refractive error, but younger kids are really in line for aggressive progression. So you may want to think about being aggressive as far as your treatment. Now, whether that is combination therapy, I'll let you define that, and we can talk a little bit about that later. But yes, age is a concern on both ends of the spectrum. And then here's this graph again. Children outside those expected norms, again, you may think about being more aggressive, whether it's that combination therapy, whether that's just starting earlier, or maybe that's just more frequent follow-ups. But there's certain age concerns that would warrant more aggressive therapy. We talk about age, keeping it on age. Kids in their mid-20s, it may be a good time to stop treatment. You know, the COMET study is something that I quote a lot in my office, and it really speaks to when we can start thinking about stopping treatment. And we'll talk a little bit about this later on. But again, helping you set your expectations on who to start, when to start, how aggressive to be, when to stop. All of these things, you're able to make these determinations or these decisions based on the evidence that's available to us. We talked so much already about family history and understanding of that particular patient's family history. Does one parent have myopia? Do 2 parents have myopia? You know, if they have 2 parents, they may be a good candidate for aggressive therapy. Ethnicity, we spoke about earlier. And children that are of Asian descent are great candidates for aggressive therapy. Why? We know that they start earlier. We know that they're more aggressive in their progression of myopia. And also axial length. We talked a little earlier about axial length, and we have that normative data. And if patients are outside that area, then it may be warranting aggressive or aggressive treatment, because we know where that child is heading. Time spent outdoors. Children who live in the inner city, this is something that I deal with a lot. Children who live in the inner city that can't get outdoors or don't have the ability to go out and play soccer or play basketball or something, they may be in line for more aggressive therapy, because study after study does a very good job at linking the myopia progression for kids that spend time indoors. And this is kind of just a quick synopsis of what we have in our office. And it just speaks to the fact that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. When I have a patient in my office and I'm making a determination as to what treatment option would be better for them, understanding the specific anatomical, specific social factors, family factors, really help me make a determination on what's going to be best for that particular patient. When it comes to setting expectations for the practitioner, I think understanding that parent conversation is so very important, and you really need to prepare yourself for it. We all know that this is very important, but parents, they don't know what they don't know. It doesn't mean that they're a bad parent because they don't understand it, but they don't have the training that we do, and it's up to us to educate them. Parents, it was an interesting study I saw that they're somewhat cognizant of the fact that it's important, but they really don't know it to the level of detail we need them to understand to take this seriously. And the reason, as we all know, they're the gatekeepers. In order to be effective in getting the treatment on these kids is to educate the parents, but it's easier said than done. And the reason being is because not all parents are the same, and I do a lot of reading on articles around myopia management, and a lot of times practitioners talk about educating parents, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and we've definitely found that in our practice. I remember having a conversation a while back with a friend of mine, and she's a psychologist. I don't know what her specific title is, but I was telling her about our conversations with parents, and I was asking her how I could be more effective, and she was very clear to tell me that I was going about it all wrong. And she meant by that was that she said that there's different parenting types. And when you're educating the parents, you really want to have an understanding of the best way to approach that particular parent. And the way she divided it up was this way. We talk about the different types of parents. You have authoritative parents, authoritarian parents, permissive parents, and uninvolved parents. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to talk about these different parenting styles. And we're going to talk about how you can present myopia management to these different types of parenting styles. Again, we talk about permissive, authoritative, neglectful, and authoritarian. So what does that mean? Let's start with the permissive parent. What is a permissive parent? Now, that parent is defined as someone that's high responsiveness and low demandingness. As depicted in this picture, the kid is who's running the show. The kids decide for themselves. The parents may set rules and expectations, but they're never enforced. The parent goes to great lengths to make sure that kid is happy. Now, I know none of you guys are psychologists, but I bet you can diagnose these patients in your exam room. I should say these parents in your exam room. So how? So a permissive parent, that's a parent that does nothing when the kid is misbehaving during the exam. That's the parent that asks the child if it's okay if Dr. Compton puts the drops in their eye. They may bribe the kid with, oh, if you do good with the drops or if you pay attention, I'll get you McDonald's. They ask the child's opinion about myopia management when you're presenting things. So this is that parent. So how do you communicate with that parent? So this is the thing. When you have a permissive parent, you're not even communicating with the parent. We found that our conversation has to be specifically with that child. You don't want to waste too much time educating the parent because that is not the person you need to convince. You have to go above and beyond to make sure that that child's experience is extremely enjoyable. Like for these kids, if you're going to do ortho K, you got to use Paparicane. You got to speak directly to the child, make that child feel involved. Why? Because that parent is going to give up at the first sign of their kid being uncomfortable. So you have to do what you can do to make sure that kid is happy. Now, authoritative parents are a little bit different. So an authoritative parent, that's defined as someone that's high responsiveness, high demandingness. Like, what does that mean? So they set clear rules and expectations. They communicate very frequently and openly with the child. They involve the child's feelings and opinions, and they keep the child very involved in the process. These parents are very nurturing and supportive, a completely different perspective from what we talked about before. So how do you diagnose that authoritative parent in your exam room? Well, these kids are generally well-behaved. The parent is monitoring every letter on the acuity chart. They're involved in the case history portion of the exam, but they often encourage the child to answer for themselves. And they're very nurturing, maybe consoling the kid when you put the dilation drops in. So when you have the authoritative parent, completely different from the last option, this conversation has to be with all three. You, the parent, and the child. You have to take your time and be very detailed with your explanations. These parents are armed with their smartphones. They're quick to look things up. They're often shocked and upset that they missed or they feel like they missed something. But you want to emphasize the point that it's a group discussion, because they're going to try and involve the child, and they want you to make sure that you're doing both, involving the child as well as the parent themselves. Let's talk about that neglectful parent, because we've all seen them. That's that low responsive, low demanding parent. They let their kids fend for themselves. They offer little guidance, little nurturance. It's often defined as the uninvolved parenting. They can sometimes come off as cold and caring, which is very easily depicted in this picture. Now, when you have these parents are really not involved in any part of the exam. I mean, you know them, you've had them in your room. The child speaks up for themselves. The parents are on their phone, they're on Instagram, Facebook, while the kid is really fending for themselves during the exam. And at times, these parents are often bothered, and they really want to get through the whole exam as quickly as possible. So again, how are you going to modify your communication with that neglectful parent? So unfortunately, just like that first time, your conversation is really with you and the child, but you got to get help. Consider yourself fortunate even to be having a conversation with these parents, okay? But you have to do your best to connect with, whether it's the mother that's not there, or the father, or another family member that can help in the decision-making process. You got to be very careful, because these types of parents are looking for any excuse to get out of there. You constantly hear things like, if there's no complaint, don't fix it. Contact lenses aren't for kids. Be prepared with pricing questions. They're looking for every little excuse to get out of that exam room or out of that discussion. So you see how you're modifying your conversation with this type of parent. Now, there's one more group that I want to talk about, and that's the authoritarian parents. And we know those as well. That's the high demanding, low responsiveness. This is the parent says, because I said so. This is what we're doing, okay? Communication is one way, from the parent to the child. The child has no say in the matter. It's often considered what we say something like tough love. Now, the parent takes complete control of the case history portion of the exam. That we're talking about how to identify them in your room. They're watching you and they're watching the child. They control everything. If the kid doesn't want the dilation drops, that's the one that says, sit down, shut up, or they hold them down. But the understanding is that parent is extremely, authoritative, and they're controlling everything in this discussion. So when it comes to this parent, how are you modifying your communication? It's you and the parent. Unfortunately, you don't even need to include the kid in this conversation, because everything is going through them. Parent education is important. Sometimes they get shocked that they may have missed something, but they're going to be very intent on what you have to say. So you have to be extremely detailed about your expectations, about your follow-ups. But remembering that that conversation is going to look completely different from others because you're really just focusing on the parent. So you see how like the different parenting types, and I hope you were able to grab something from this, because when we do this in our practice, we've found so much success with it. I would say your expertise is something that's really important when it comes to setting your expectations on myopia management. And there's really two different groups, and we talk about that, whether those that are getting started, not feeling like you have to jump in full blown. You can take a stepwise approach. And if for those of us that are already practicing, always looking for ways to become more efficient. You know, we talk about parental expectations. That specific group, there's a lot to it, and understanding how what a patient, or I should say a parent, is. This is all new for them. So what are they looking to accomplish if they don't do treatment, or if they do treatment, and what does successful treatment look like? You know, we talk about non-treatment in our office. We have different approaches. You know, if you want to educate a patient on non-treatment, I mean, you can use that fear approach, and we do that often. Here's like a little script that we talk about where we kind of identify the normal range of myopia, identify where their child is, and talk about risk factors for retinal detachment, macular degeneration, glaucoma. Personal experience is a great way to educate the patient on the fears or the risks of non-treatment. You know, talking about their history of myopia and their experience with glasses in schools and the troubles that they had. You know, some parents really need that research, and explaining to them where their child is and what their risk factors are based on the studies if we don't do anything. But again, it's very important to set those expectations around treatment. You know, if a patient or a parent is going to have treatment, they really need to understand that whole process from beginning to end. And it doesn't end during the consultation, okay? You need to give them constant reminders throughout the process and have a clear understanding of what the end looks like. You know, parents should be able to take things home, getting additional resources and information. And we could spend an hour talking about consent forms. My consent form is like signing for a house, like talking about fees and follow-ups and returns and warranties. Helping that parent have that expectations in the beginning. Expectations is very important. In the middle, constant reminders, whether it's emails, follow-ups. We use telemedicine or in-person follow-ups. Replacements, prescription refills, all of these things, you have to be very clear when educating the patient on their expectations. And toward the end, you know, have a plan ready. You know, some of these kids drop out. Why? Because of laziness. Maybe it's a financial thing. Maybe a sibling now has myopia and they don't want to pay, and it's getting expensive. You have to have a plan ready and expect the conversations that are coming to these parents. You know, stopping myopia management is something very important, and a question that constantly comes up. And the COMET study is something that I reference all the time. And 90% of people stop progressing at 21 and 96 at 24. So early 20s is really when I start telling parents that we can start thinking about stopping. You know, when we're stopping. And success, you know, what does success look like? You know, and this is a conversation I think is extremely important, because when you have a patient that for us is successful, it means that we have 50% reduction. Okay. So what does that mean? You know, like you have a patient that starts you out with -8, that's 8 years old, right? They start with a -1. Okay. When she sees you, you're -1. So she's predicted on average to go up a half a diopter every year. So when she's 16, if we do nothing at all, we're expecting her to be a -5, right? So with 50% reduction, what we feel is a win has that kid at about a -3 at 16. So what you have to be able to help the parent understand is expectation is not to completely stop myopia. We're not stopping the progression, we're slowing it down. That 50% is very important, because as they see those numbers going up, they're going to question your effectiveness. So you have to set expectations extremely early that our goal isn't to stop it, but we're minimizing it by 50%. Kind of want to talk a little bit about your staff and the expectations they may have around myopia management. And it all boils down to preparing yourself and educating your staff. I mean, my staff, I have this picture here talking about the Post-its, but anytime I bring something in to the practice, I know I need to make sure that, especially my front desk, has that elevator pitch where they know that 1 to 2 sentence reply of what it is, just in case someone calls, that they're not completely in the dark. And they, more importantly, they know who to shuffle that call to, whether it's a technician or a super tech in your office. But everyone in every person in your staff needs to have a basic understanding of what you're bringing on. This is my specialty products coordinator. She has a much higher understanding of it. She communicates very specifically with consultation and the patients, but she is the first point of contact for all of our patients in the myopia management portion of our practice. I call her the closer. You know, she has a very intense education, and I give her the resources to succeed. This is her office. It's a lounge area where she can sit down with the parent for 10 minutes, 1 hour, but she can give the parent the time that they deserve to understand the process and what's involved. It's commission-based. She has resources, and she works hand in hand with a lot of the consultants to make sure that she has everything at her disposal. Now, you may not have the ability to have someone at that level, but when you're making decisions about staffing, and you really have to make sure that they have expectations that are clear. You know, spectacles, atropine, soft lenses, ortho-K, there's all sorts of differences in follow-ups and involvement with the patient. And if you don't have the manpower to be able to do this, you may be setting yourself up for a very serious challenge. There's specific follow-ups that are recommended for soft lenses, ortho-K, spectacles, and atropine. So you need to make sure that you have the staff that is available to support that. You know, finally, I'm going to kind of end it off with the expectations of the patient. I mean, you know, the kids don't care about anything other than just being comfortable. And they are the reason why we're doing this, and you've all come across it if you're doing or anything with kids. You know, there's certain kids that don't even flinch when you put the lenses in the eyes, and then the other ones that can't really distinguish, you know, slight discomfort to, you know, you ripping their arm off. So maturity is a primary issue. So you want to try your best to set expectations for that child as early on as possible when you're doing drops, as they're sitting in the exam room, the length of time that they spend in the office. I'm just going to kind of close with some tips, and then hopefully we can have a nice discussion at the end, but just different things that we do in our office. Sometimes if you can't get the lens in, you talk about using anesthetic, you know, talking about the number of visits. I always tell the kids and the parents that insertion removal takes more than 1 visit. You know, if they get it the first day, they're proud and they have bragging rights. But if they don't get it the first day, they don't feel defeated. Be cognizant of the time that the kid's spending in the office. 30 minutes is a long time. You may want to consider bringing them back. You know, if you can get the lenses in, you shouldn't feel defeated. There are different things that you can do to get the kid prepared, whether at this visit or the next one. You know, practice touching the lower lid. You know, if they fear the rigid lenses, you could practice with soft lenses. Give them homework in between visits. Give them a bottle of artificial tears. Let them practice putting artificial tears. Help them get to a point where they can feel accomplished about putting things in their eyes. Parents play a huge role. Some parents can be helpful, and I've had instances where I have to kick parents out the room. You know, you have to be able to manage those overbearing parents and parents that can be an asset in the training process. So I wanted to just give some time for some questions. We'll open it up at this point, but I hope that we were able to identify how every specific group has different expectations. We really want to be able to understand those expectations so that we can have an effective myopia management practice. Thank you.
All right, everybody, Dr. Compton, I don't know if you saw all of the action that was going on. People were just absolutely just eating up everything you were saying. That was a phenomenal overview about management and engaging myopia management into the practice. So thank you so much.
Thank you. No, it's great. My pleasure. My pleasure.
So I know that you are, you've got this phenomenal practice in New York City, and New York can be a really challenging group of patients because they're conservative, but they also want to be extremely well informed. So taking that and trying to create kind of a unique specialized practice, especially in this type of patient population for myopia management and control. I know you finished residency in '06. How did you know that this was something you wanted to embrace, and how did you take the leap of faith of incorporating this?
Well, I mean, it kind of goes to like where the literature is at. Like if you go to a conference nowadays, if you open any magazine on eye care, they're addressing myopia management. And I mean, for years, we've known that there was a problem. Like you had little Johnny coming, his prescription went up half a diopter. Next year went up more. We had nothing to offer. Now we do. Not only do we have things to offer, we have studies to prove that like this stuff actually works. So, being able to give that option to my patients was a very easy decision to make.
And in so doing, and how long have you, it sounds like you mentioned at least for the last 8 years, you've really embraced it, and you do the breadth of the combination of the drops as well as the different technologies. Do you see the results of seeing that it slows down the myopia? What kind of satisfaction does that really give you to help encourage other doctors to want to kind of take this on? Because I can bet you it might be tough to jump into this because it's going to take work.
Absolutely. And it's about that offer that we talked about, being able to offer mom or dad the ability to control this. And jumping into it sometimes can seem intimidating, but what I often tell practitioners, you don't have to go all in. I mean, it really starts with your education, just educating the parent. You can start off as simply talking about outdoors time and the benefits of that. You can start with atropine, maybe you get a little bit more comfort. You can go towards soft lenses. I mean, at that point, you still haven't purchased any real equipment. I mean, you don't necessarily have to have an A scan. I mean, it helps, but I mean, right now your atropine, soft lenses is fine. And as you get a little bit more comfort, then maybe you think about the ortho K, because you have to start thinking about investing in equipment. But think of it more of a stepwise approach, kind of getting in little by little. It will help for your comfort level and your sanity.
Such great pros. And then, I've had different companies approach our referring doctors, and our referring ODs also tell us that they are doing myopia programs, like true programs where it's kind of laid out for them, where a group comes in and it's like laid out, right? Versus you are independent, you have a group of various offerings because you utilize various technologies. Do you think one versus the other way of going is easier? Is there any, pearl of advice you would offer there?
I think it has all to do with your support system. I mean, if you're a single practitioner, have maybe 1 or 2 staff members, a program like that can be extremely helpful because you may not have the time to dedicate to it. I mean, my office, I have a very strong support staff. We have all sorts of power optometrics. We have like what we call super techs. It enables me to focus more so on the marketing aspects, building those programs. So I wouldn't say one is better than the other. It's kind of what your unique situation would call for.
Gotcha. And we don't have too much time on this, but we have a lot of MDs on this as well. And I, as an MD, I'm going to tell you, the first time I heard about orthokeratology, because as a cornea specialist, I'm managing all sorts of microbial keratitis and whatnot. I was not a believer. I am now a believer. I think done right, especially now, Ortho-K today, very different. What can you say to, the MD colleagues, of where we are with Ortho-K today? Is it just very different, or is it just more education around it that makes it that much safer?
Well, I think that's the key, because And we even have this conversation with the parents when we talk about safety, but there are numerous studies to show that, using these lenses overnight is not increasing your risk for microbial keratitis any more than a regular contact lens. Yes, it's very important that you talk about the education piece and proper lens care and hygiene, but the studies show that it's safe. And that's really where I would like to have that conversation with other MDs or even optometrists that may be a little reluctant to do it. The studies show otherwise.
Wonderful. And Dr. Compton, there have been a lot of requests for a PDF copy potentially of your talk. So if that is something that might be available, then, I'll make certain that that might be potentially available through Eyes on 23 for a PDF copy.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I hear that you might have almost broken the Eyes on 23 internet. Rightfully so. Incredible. Thank you for making our Friday night with this wonderful, wonderful talk.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me.